And now I'd like to welcome to the program Veronika this is so hard for me. Poniscjakova?
Poniscjakova, yes. I'm University of Portsmouth. Hello, and welcome to TVP World.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yes. Now, yesterday we saw images coming from Portsmouth. Maybe you saw some of these commemorations that were taking place there?
Unfortunately, I didn't. I'm afraid.
Okay. Well, it looks like we have President Biden going to France for the D-Day commemorations. And, I recall back to the last 75th anniversary commemorations, which Donald Trump took part in. And I remember all the criticism, of course, around that, and the kind of schooling that he received from various different European leaders. How would you say that this year's commemorations with President Joe Biden at the head of the U.S. presidency, how will this be different than the last ones that we saw, for instance?
I think that it obviously is going to be overshadowed by the ongoing conflicts. The allies will show that they were able to work together 80 years ago, and that they can work together now, even nowadays, against other enemies that the Western world is facing. But generally speaking, I think we can expect a fairly calm commemoration of the D-Day and Operation Overlord.
Right. So. And now moving on to Ukraine's peace summit, I wonder because President Biden will not attend the upcoming summit in Switzerland, and instead Vice President Kamala Harris, of course, and Jake Sullivan are to represent the United States. But I feel like we do have to mention that Biden's absence is notable, given his administration's strong support for Ukraine. So what does the U.S. stance mean to your mind here?
Personally, I would not read too much into it. Whilst I can absolutely understand Zelenskyy's disappointment about Joe Biden's absence, on the other hand, Joe Biden prioritizing his fundraising event is actually going to help Zelenskyy and Ukraine in the long run. Given that the ruling last week did not really hurt Donald Trump in the polls, I think it is in interest of Ukraine to make sure that Biden can raise enough money for the upcoming election, because if Joe Biden does not win in the November election, I'm afraid that funding that the United States has been providing to Ukraine in the past over the past 2 years, that could be cut off. So at the end of the day, it may be disappointing, but it is the best thing for Ukraine, actually.
Well, critics say that Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris, as well as Jake Sullivan, are two of the most inept members of the Biden administration, and that that's very telling, that when Biden sends two of his worst to this peace summit, this means that, the U.S. is not very optimistic about its outcome.
I can absolutely see why that may be perceived as such. I think Kamala Harris in particular does not really have great reputation and has been labeled as one of the most ineffective vice presidents in the U.S. history, and certainly doesn't seem to have much experience with foreign policy of any kind. Having said that, sending high-ranking U.S. administration officials to Switzerland still is a fairly strong message that the United States is committed to Ukraine, and they are committed to supporting Ukraine for as long as it takes.
Right. So now, looking at the key goals of the peace summit itself, I wonder because one key goal here is to find a way to eventually, of course, involve Russia in the peace process. But Russia seems to be quite disinterested in attending, of course. But how do you think that we can talk about a peace summit when, for instance, both parties, I mean, Russia and Ukraine, they do not, of course, see eye to eye, and Russia does not really see how the peace itself could, let's say, reveal itself. So how do you feel like we should operate around this? Of course, now Russia will be absent from the meeting itself.
Well, first of all, I would say that the peace summit is not as much about finding permanent resolution to the war in Ukraine, because as you said, with Russia not present and with Russia not agreeing to any of the points that are going to come out of the summit, it's not going to be that useful. So I think that the summit is more about confirming the ongoing support for Ukraine for as long as it takes for them to win the war. I think we should not be surprised that Russia has no interest in this summit or any other attempts at resolution, because all of the summits, all of these talks, they revolve around the idea of, well, sticking to the international law, accepting Ukraine's sovereignty. And of course, Russia has absolutely no interest in doing that. They do want to keep, at least parts of Ukraine. And given they have been violating international law consistently over the past 2 years, I don't think we can really expect any enthusiasm on part of Russia to partake in any negotiations or diplomatic efforts.
Certainly. Well, Veronika Poniscjakova, thank you very much for joining us from the University of Portsmouth. I hope I got your name correct. Thanks for joining us this morning. We appreciate it.